The lovely Laura is up there at the front, waiting to bring the microphone to the first table to report. So perhaps, should we go to this table over here on the right? Thank you. If you can just introduce which topic we're covering. Thank you. Which topic is this?
This one is on air pollution.
Air pollution. I think we've got another table on air pollution as well somewhere, have we? Or is it just one table? No, just the one. Good.
All right. Okay, so the challenge we looked at was we couldn't measure air pollution to the levels that we need to. And the issues here is that the measurements that we do, they tend to use a very small number of monitoring stations across the country. So in a city, there'll be maybe 3 sites that someone like DEFRA would use, and what the government are trying to do, they just don't want us to exceed that EU limit value of, say, 40 micrograms per metre cube. There's also issues with the reliability of the monitoring equipment. We're using things like diffusion tubes, and it takes, say, for validated data to come back from our monitoring sites from DEFRA, it could take months on end. By that time, how do you react to that data that you're given? How do you give the right information out to your citizens? So we looked at whether we could understand the data. We looked at the data that we could use to model air pollution. Then we started to go into some of the limits of that. We looked at ANPR data. So typically, you might use something like DEFRA's emission factor toolkit, and you'll use your ANPR data to come up with an idea of what your fleet looks like. And then some of us who've used ANPR data, we got that from the DVLA. You know, it can be 10% of the data is just unusable. You don't know what those vehicles are. So there's problems with that ANPR data there. So then we looked at what are some of these solutions then? What could we do better? What is the right level of data that we need? So we looked at pollution monitoring. We looked at whether that we could have sort of Internet of Things sensors, air pollution centres that are low cost that we can give to large amounts of people. There are still issues with that. It's not going to be very accurate, but it gives you more sort of indicative values of where there would be high pollution areas. There's issues with the funding around that as well. We also looked at perhaps we can move certain types of vehicles or certain types of traffic away from pollution areas. So we looked at, there's an example in London where they're starting to roll out what's known as quiet ways, where cyclists, they're encouraged to use more quieter parts of the network as well. So we thought if we did have sort of better data, better air pollution data, could we get somewhere? Well, we still need to get to a very fine granular level. In city centres, one side of a street could be more polluted than the other. That's just due to, say, street canyon effects. To get that sort of level of granularity where you're getting all of the information to people, it's going to take huge advances in computational power and a huge amount of more sensors. We need to get it at that level. We need meteorology stations on every street corner. We need air pollution sensors in every corner. We need to know what the congestion levels are like. So that's not really realistic. But there might be some sort of middle ground there. We put a few more sensors out. We start taking some more of the data, and we might be able to get better information to our citizens by using apps. Just getting that information, getting information out there. So that's what we'd like to see in the future. Better modelling, getting more information out there. We did touch on sort of splitting cities or areas up into zones, whereby if we got the right information on pollution levels, we start to look at charge in different areas. So if there's an area of the city that's got high air pollution, we charge people for entering there, and that would keep that quite dynamic. So that's everything that we looked at.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm conscious of time and so on, so maybe next table can just be a little bit quicker. Thank you very much. I'm aware we've got a few to get round.
So our challenge was data usage. We went proper Yorkshire on this, so there was a lot of complaints and challenges, so I won't do all of them, but it was mainly about how we get value from data. So there's a lot of, certainly with a lot of systems where there's a lot of legacy systems, siloed data storage, there's third-party systems, so they may not even give you access to the data. And even when you've got access to it, how do you actually get value from it in terms of analytics and understanding what the data is giving you? So in terms of limits, it's really about not thinking about why you're collecting data. People tend to start with, let's just get all of this data and then we'll worry about that afterwards, and then nobody ever does. So there's a limit in time, skill and resources in looking at that. You get old data which skews results anyway. There's no real artificial intelligence or machine learning, so there's nothing there that's helping people understand what the data's giving you.
Although obviously that capability is moving very fast now.
It is now, yeah. But again, you've got to get beyond these siloed data systems and people being overly protective of the data.
So it's
in order to produce that. Which is again something else we've got, which it's the lack of open standards for sharing data, which hopefully Meridian 2 can sort out. There's no coordination. I'm
beginning to almost hear a discovery project here.
It's funny, isn't it?
I see a smile from someone.
There's a lack of coordination and continuity. So again, when we're talking about local authorities, they all probably have quite similar issues, but are they all talking to each other, sharing data and understandings? It can be quite parochial in terms of these small projects that are happening in cities that are really, really useful and nobody else gets access to it. So we really decided, I'm a big Simon Sinek fan, I don't know if anybody else has read him, but it's really good. But start with why. So why are you doing it? So what do we want to do? Why are we doing it? What do we actually need to do it? And what don't we need? Certainly in this case, in terms of data, getting the right information to the right people at the right time, adding value to it, so enhancing it and putting artificial intelligence and machine learning and data visualization tools so that when somebody gets that information, they can understand it quite easily. And I'll stop there with my remit of being quicker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. And the table here was looking at what?
Data usage.
Oh, okay. So, be interesting to compare notes.
Yes. So it was a lot of similar things we picked up on data usage. We also said that you need to have the data output needs to be of a quality data set, and it's got to be clear what it's actually got. Visualization, very important, because that will give you other insights. And likewise, we said it's not so much, you need to think what you're trying to solve, not what the data you're trying to collect. So what are you trying to solve? Then you can work out what data you need and think about what the source of that could be. So we were looking at a viewpoint of, can you, by reusing data from other sources, get away from putting specific assets in to collect something. And so it's really about data usage, standardizing and making it clearly usable. Obviously limits on costs and things like that.
Okay, great, thank you. And over here we've got connected and autonomous vehicles.
Thank you. Right, so I'm going to summarise some of the challenges. I suspect everyone knows the challenges really for this area. But the main things from our point of view were awareness of the technologies, what are the authorities doing, particularly around public acceptance. I think we raised the issue around confusion about what the level of autonomy means, particularly sort of semi-autonomous systems, there's a particular challenge around the media. It was highlighted that we feel we have a much better, much stronger safety approach than the US, but that's not really covered in the media. And there's the challenges for the local authorities around infrastructure, what connectivity is required, what's going to happen in the future. And then the final point was raised around insurance claims. So if there isn't, it's going to be a lot more complicated with these kind of vehicles. So data ownership, data access could be quite an important one. And then at the moment, a lot of the limits are around the technology and whether the technology and the sensors is capable of delivering the autonomous systems we want. Infrastructure is highlighted as another issue, not just the high-tech infrastructure, but things such as simple stuff like clean signs, markings, and there's a question around whether there's resources and money to deal with these issues, and also is there political will to do it? There's all the issues around legal insurance, so that's been covered many times before, so I'm not going to talk about that too much. So going on to the how do we solve some of these problems, we highlighted that the public demonstrators are very important, that actually the experience from Coventry is that if you get people out there into a vehicle, that their attitudes shift and actually a lot of their fears and move away. The suggestions around whether we can adopt plug-and-play modular solutions, because if there's a risk that things we put in now aren't going to be there, suitable for particularly infrastructure, how to improve that. And a lot around ownership models, promotion, etc. And essentially to cover that the autonomous systems are a positive thing and not a negative thing. So, and then around the sort of deliverables side of things that we were really looking for is kind of, it's a lot of really best practice and frameworks. So what's the infrastructure look like? How can that work? Are we looking at shared spaces? And that's sharing the best practice, not just from the UK, but worldwide. And then it's all the usual stuff. So if we do all this well, we can hopefully have a lot more public transport, less congestion, better productivity, etc.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I think that might be useful to get a copy of that one, Richard, for your CAV stuff at Innovate.
This is not agreed.
Most of a clue.
I wasn't ready for this, so apologies. So we looked at intelligent mobility, and a lot of the stuff that we focused on was sort of looking at from the customer side of things. So I think for challenges, I mean, I wrote a lot, so I'm just going to pick like top 3. Oh God, there's too many. So it would be utilising existing resources. There's a fragmentation of services at the moment, and I think lack of awareness for local authorities of what intelligent mobility is and what it can do to improve our services. Limits. Okay, top one's unions. So I suppose it would be the fear of losing jobs from the introduction of automation. Funding. So again, going back to local authorities, if it's a big limit for us. So if we had more funding, then we'd have more resources to sort of mitigate the issues and challenges. And then demand. So do customers really want intelligent solutions, or do they just like having loads and loads of options to book their travel? So it's sort of just understanding what that is and where it is. So for solutions, obviously integration of services, visibility of information and live information, and then sort of upskilling. So trying to like get more people in the industry as well, so that we sort of fill in all those gaps. For future deliverables, educating customers on the benefits of intelligent mobility, and put for local authorities, define what intelligent mobility is, sort of, and weave it into the LTP or within like the regional strategy. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. That's interesting. Defining what intelligent mobility is. I was watching one of the recent Transport Select Committee hearings where they were asked for a definition a definition of mass, and I think they got 3 different definitions from the different people. Okay, the final table.
I'm enthusiastic as always, Walter.
I know, I can tell.
I was scribing, but there's a certain amount of my own opinion, so I do encourage my table to interrupt if there seemed to be consensus that for data platforms that there is a recognition we need one authoritative location. The question is, what does that mean? It doesn't necessarily need to be a platform. If we look at the domain name system, it's just an address that can be pointed to. Something I wrote, we didn't surface it, but I think it is a truism that we will never get the world to agree that one platform is a solution. The world is too big for that to be possible. The nearest we got to it is with driving licenses, which are done through the United Nations. And when Oliver Morley at DVLA decided he wanted a digital driving license, it was stopped in its tracks.
Leave the history. We haven't got time for the history.
But so we need to, in terms of challenges, we need to avoid creating a single point of failure. We need interoperability. And we need to avoid supplier lock-in. I think those are the kind of, key challenges. When it comes to critical safety areas like autonomy, that becomes really, really vital. And, for that matter, traffic signals and all sorts of other areas will benefit from avoiding supplier lock-in. In terms of future deliverables, we look forward to a time when information is accessible and data for cabs, all sorts of other areas of the transport network. And we need to create a means of communicating with cabs, with human drivers, everyone. That's critical as well. We got limits. So we got local limits, regional limits, national and international limits, because we need to get agreement for things to work. We need to be mindful of cost, and that's where the supplier lock-in thing becomes quite dangerous to us. In terms of solutions, we need a solution that is modelled and could be modelled on other areas where learnings have already, been built on a large scale. So the internet is a very, very good example of a distributed system. So we somehow need to take advantage of kind of our common understanding of centrality and its value alongside the advantages we have with modern compute, where they can be very, very distributed. And that, to me, is the future of data platforms that I captured from the discussion we had. Does anyone else want to add to that?
No.
Then we declare that as the results from Luxembourg.
Thank you very much, Nick.